gay organisations included offering help for LGBT persons to live chaste and celibate lives, and labelled counselling, prayer, scripture reading and fasting as all examples of conversion practices. There are some groups that even want clear teaching about sexual morality to be labelled as conversion practices. For example, Amnesty International has said that statements of belief are tools of the conversion practices movement. If religious ministries are labelled as conversion practices, could organisations like Courage, that do not attempt to change a person's sexual orientation, but assist them through prayer, spiritual direction, community support and the like to live their call to chastity, be at risk? If religious teaching is similarly defined as a conversion practice, what hope is there for theology of the body courses? And while those of us in the room might be able to clearly tell the difference, the extent of what suppression means is unclear even to those proposing the laws. In announcing the proposed ban on conversion therapy in the ACT, Chief Minister Andrew Barr seemed to give contradictory answers to questions about whether groups that promoted chastity would be included in the ban. First, he said that a support group that encouraged celibacy would not be criminalised. But he also expressed agreement with a statement that said those types of groups are most certainly a form of conversion practice. A precise legal definition of what does and doesn't count as conversion practice will be essential to this legislation, but when it comes to religious freedom, there seems to be a real reluctance by the state to be too prescriptive and rather to allow a broad definition to be interpreted by the courts, which is really risky for the church. Like asking for exemptions to anti-discrimination acts, lobbying for some form of conversion therapy will also be unpopular. But governments should be held to account about whether a person has a right to seek the help that they need to help them live out the choices they have made about their own sexual activity. And if the answer to that is yes, and a person has the right to seek that help, the governments must not make chastity the only sexual choice for which a person is prohibited at law from seeking assistance. Or does the mandatory inclusiveness of all sexualities operate in such a way to exclude those who want to live a chaste life in accordance with their beliefs? And that's only the sexual orientation side. If we go back to the definition from the Health Care Complaints Commissioner, it's very clear that this also applies to gender dysphoria, meaning that religious groups and health professionals may be bound to affirm someone in their chosen gender or to risk prosecution. The progress of these promised laws during 2020 is something we need to watch. And while the state might be able to outlaw some types of therapy, it is well beyond its competence to prohibit conversion. For those experiencing same-sex attraction or gender dysphoria, or indeed for any of us, the state doesn't get to ban conversion. Which is my attempt at providing a segue into the last part of this evening's discussion, which is the seal of confession. In some ways, we might see the confessional seal as distinct from other issues of religious freedom, because there are some key differences about how it's dealt with in good effects. Threats or actions to remove the seal of confession are not exactly the same as other religious freedom issues, because the reason for the moves is different. While much of the conversation we've been having about religious freedom connects in some way to the legalisation of same-sex marriage or the associated push for gender ideology, the impetus for abolishing the legal protections for the seal of confession finds its justification in the awful crime of child sexual abuse and its cover-up. The attack, rather than coming from outside ideologies, finds its original source within the church. The scourge of child sexual abuse in institutions generally, and in the Catholic Church specifically, led to the 5-year-long Royal Commission into Institutional Responses to Child Sexual Abuse that handed down its findings in December 2017. The Royal Commission made 3 recommendations relevant to the confessional seal, 2 generic in nature and 1 specific to the Catholic Church. In terms of the general recommendations, recommendation 7.4 provided that mandatory reporting laws relating to child protection should not exempt persons in religious ministry from being required to report knowledge or suspicions formed in whole or in part on the basis of information disclosed in or in connection with a religious confession. Up until recently, most mandatory reporting laws followed the pattern of recognising religious freedom through exemptions, with the laws requiring ministers of religion to report suspected child abuse and then providing an exemption for information gained in confession. Like the winding back of other religious freedom protections, the proposal is to remove these exemptions. But in addition to the removal of exemptions, it was also proposed that a new failure to report offence be introduced, and that this should be applicable to knowledge gained or suspicions formed inside confession. And again, this continues to mirror the way religious freedoms are being wound back in other areas. Exemptions are being removed from existing laws, and new laws aren't including analogous freedoms. The response from the Catholic Church to these recommendations has been predictable and largely uniform. Wherever a priest or bishop might place themselves along the liberal conservative spectrum, there is unity of message that the seal will not be broken, irrespective of what the civil law says. The Church understands what those who do not frequent sacramental confession don't. That confession is a private act of individual conscience, and so any restriction placed upon it would not be a limitation on the public manifestation of belief, where restrictions are occasionally permitted, but a private matter where the freedom of thought, conscience and religion is absolute. This has been backed up by the Holy See, which in July of this year confirmed that the sacramental seal includes all the sins of both the penitent and others known from the penitent's confession, and cannot be breached even if absolution is denied for some reason. The Church defends the seal in part because secret confession has long been part of the Christian tradition. This was recognised by the Royal Commission itself, which cited a reference to a 459 AD decree of Pope Leo I as the first papal decree safeguarding the secrecy of confession. And as far back as the 17th century, Pope Innocent XI prohibited the use of information gained in the course of confession, even to prevent some greater evil, and even when there was no danger of exposing the penitent. The Church also defends the seal because, based on the pastoral experience of confession, she knows that requiring priests to reveal what is said in confession would be ineffective and counterproductive. In terms of its ineffectiveness, it's worth quoting retired Bishop Geoffrey Robinson at length, because his insights are relevant to the religious freedom implications for the changing law. Bishop Robinson says, concerning the confessional, the first point to make is that paedophile priests simply don't go to confession. Partly this is because of their distorted thinking, that is commonly part of their offence, that they have convinced themselves that what they are doing is not wrong. Partly it is due to a fear that any priest they approach would not give them an easy absolution, but instead be very demanding indeed in terms of a purpose of amendment. If any ever did go to confession, then make sure it was in circumstances where they would not be recognised. The priest hearing the confession would probably not know of the identity of the offender or of the victim, and so would have no specific crime to report. Furthermore, if a single priest broke the seal of confession and reported the matter to police, that would be the last time any paedophile priest confessed to anything, anywhere. With respect to the breaking of the seal being counterproductive, Father Frank Brennan has commented that if the seal of the confessional were maintained, there is a chance that a child sexual abuser might be convinced by the priest to turn himself in. Take away the seal, he says, and that ever so slim chance will be snuffed out. And this isn't just an assertion from the Catholics, it's also apparent from the evidence before the Royal Commission itself. The Commission pointed to an Irish study conducted by psychologist Dr. Murray Keenan as saying that out of 8 of the 9 clergy who participated in her study confessed to the abuse in the sacrament of reconciliation, and the Commission used this to justify its recommendations that the protections for the seal be removed. Crucially, however, the Commission did not address the key detail of Dr. Keenan's study, which found that priest perpetrators of child sexual abuse did not confess their crimes in sufficient detail to invite counsel, guidance, or reproof. Thank you, Professor Thompson. It was also the view of the Justice and Community Safety Directorate of the Australian Capital Territory, which earlier this year reported that sexual abuses of children would probably avoid confession altogether, or alternatively, exploit the potential under the right of confession prevalent in Australia to confess anonymously and non-specifically in order to avoid disclosures that will lead to their detection or oblige the priest to report. So essentially, we're talking about a law that's trying to solve a problem that doesn't exist. That's relevant. I'll get to that in a moment. But at first glance, it could appear also that the impact of these laws affect only Catholics, and even then, only the small percentage of us who still go to confession. Or narrower still, it could seem that they impact the near non-existent group of child sexual abusers or abuse victims who go to confession in circumstances where they have chosen to not be anonymous, and the priests who hear those confessions. Its scope isn't that limited though. Orthodox Christians, Mormons, some Anglicans, Lutherans and Methodists all practice some form of private confession in which the minister is forbidden to repeat what they've heard to anyone. And it's not only about child abusers and victims, because the laws being enacted extend far beyond child sexual abuse. The South Australian laws were the first to be passed, and they require disclosure of any actual or likely harm of a kind from which children are usually protected to be reported. And harm is defined as including physical or psychological harm caused by action or omission, sexual, physical, mental or emotional abuse or neglect, but does provide a small carve-out for emotional reactions such as distress, grief, fear or anger that are a response to the ordinary vicissitudes of life. These laws reach into every family home because if obeyed, they would require a priest to decide whether a mother confessing to losing her temper with her kids was a response to the ordinary vicissitudes of life or reportable conduct. And the expensive scope does not end there, because the real effect of these laws will not be seen in confession, but in the points of leverage that a government may use to enforce compliance. Last month, Melbourne City Councillor Nicholas Francis Gilly put forward a motion that would have council management asked places of worship to publicly declare that they would comply with all mandatory reporting laws. The proposal was that the council would erect signs outside places of worship that didn't reply or replied and said that the seal would be upheld, saying that those places were unsafe for children. There was some resistance within the council and so a watered down motion was passed. But the difference was just semantics. All that really changed in the resolution is the council is first going to check whether or not they have any business meddling in the state law before they proceed to do it. But even if the council motion goes nowhere, it speaks to a deeper issue about mandatory reporting laws and the seal. Note what the council is trying to do. They do not have any evidence that mandatory reporting law is being broken within these churches or elsewhere by Catholic priests. They don't have any evidence that the mandatory reporting laws will ever be broken because, as we heard from Bishop Robinson and from others, those who abuse children don't go to confession, and even if they did, they don't confess their crimes in sufficient detail or without anonymity to make any type of report useful. Because of the rarity of these crimes being confessed, the council knows that it's unlikely that a priest will ever be put in a situation where these mandatory reporting laws become applicable to him inside confession. And they also know that if he was, he would accept a prison sentence rather than betray his vows, the penitent and the seal. So instead, they're looking for other ways to punish the church or any churches for asserting religious freedom when it comes to the seal of confession. The council's proposed unsafe signs were just one example of a punishment that they were talking about. Another example was to remove the rates exemptions currently enjoyed by places of worship and reassessing future procurement opportunities, trying to place financial pressure on churches to comply with the laws. moving away from Melbourne and across to the Australian Capital Territory, we saw that on the same day, I think, that the mandatory reporting laws were passed, the education regulations were changed to require that all non-government schools, including Catholic schools, work with the Minister of Education to implement the recommendations of the Royal Commission, including presumably the recommendation around the civil confession, in order to maintain their registration as schools. The new regulations haven't been tested yet, but it is possible, and dare I say likely, that at some point a Catholic school that takes students to the sacrament of confession during school hours will be asked to demonstrate why its renewal of registration as a school should be committed. There have also been suggestions, as not yet acted upon, that applications for working with children checks would require an applicant to certify that they will comply with all mandatory reporting laws in order to be eligible for the check. Without it, clergy would not be able to be involved with any ministry to minors, including celebrating masses and during confessions. Again, no crime is necessary to be committed for these restrictions to be imposed. Just an assertion that if the situation did arise, religious freedom considerations would prevail. Even more of an imposition on freedoms than all of this would be the grave imposition on the rights of the confessor priest. Not only would the rare case of abuse being confessed or disclosed place him in the position of needing to choose between breaking the civil law or risking fines and imprisonment, or betraying his flock, breaking the law of the church and risking excommunication, even a priest who never hears abuse confessed or disclosed would still be placed in a vulnerable position, because it would be impossible for him to provide any defence to a false accusation. The priest is not only forbidden from revealing the contents of confession, but he could also not reveal whether something was not said, or even if the confession occurred at all. If the civil law were to obligate a priest to reveal what was said in confession, it would create a situation where it would be impossible for the accused priest to put on a defence, because he would not be able to confirm or deny the content of the confession or even its existence. The creation of an offence that cannot be defended against is not in accordance with good public policy or principles of natural justice that require every accused person to be afforded the opportunity to face and challenge their accusers. Michael quoted scripture in the intro, and so I'm going to quote it at the end. Even back in biblical times, Festus made an appeal to King Agrippa on behalf of the imprisoned St. Paul, saying that it was not the custom of the Romans to give up anyone before the accused met the accusers face to face and had an opportunity to make his defence concerning the charges laid against him. The inability to provide a defence was played out in the United States in the case of a priest named Father Jeff Fahey and a young girl named Rebecca Mayu. Some of you might be familiar with this case. Father Bakey from the Diocese of Baton Rouge was sued by Rebecca's parents because she had told her parents that when she was 14 years old, she had confessed a relationship with an older parishioner that included kissing and fondling, and that Father Bakey had told her not to tell anyone about the affair. The parents alleged that this advice caused their daughter harm, and that Father Bakey had failed to comply with mandatory reporting laws. Even though confessional privilege does exist in Louisiana, the parents argued that what Rebecca told the priest was not a confession, because she was not confessing her own sin, but disclosing the sin and the crimes of a third party. They argued in the alternative that even if a confession had taken place, that confessional privilege belongs to the penitent, it doesn't belong to the confessor. And so Father Bakey had no right to claim confessional privilege when it came to being asked for his testimony. Father Bakey could not provide a defence, except to tell the court that he was not permitted to reveal the contents of a confession, or even if Rebecca had ever been to him for confession, and to argue just on principle for the protection of the seal. The complainants ended up withdrawing their complaint, but only after 9 long years of litigation and an agreement that each party would pay its own costs. It was a fight worth having, to be sure, but in the end, 9 years of litigation, the process itself was a punishment. I imagine that we will need to engage in many court battles like this one, where the outcome could go our way, but we'll spend many years in litigation in courts and tribunals anyway. And this will not be helped by vague drafting in crucial pieces of legislation around discrimination, conversion practices and confession. We're all going to need to be united on the battlefield for many years to come. And there's one point I just want to make in conclusion, and it's where I finish with any time I'm asked to address religious freedom. Really, the best way that we can protect our religious freedoms is to exercise them. There's no point in fighting for the legal right to ensure our Catholic schools and other institutions have the right to maintain their Catholic ethos if we give it away voluntarily anyway. There's no point in asking politicians to stand up for the seal of confession if we've long abandoned the practice. If we're really serious about the protection of religious freedom, then we need to be out there every day, manifesting our faith in public through our words, through our works and through our witness. So if you leave here with anything this evening, I'd like you to leave with a firm commitment to be united in the battle to exercise our freedoms as well. Thank you.